If there is one thing I understand, it's that I have acquired much ire for not believing in this theory, but no, I do not think Al equals Subaru. I know the inevitability with videos like this is that if I'm wrong, people will come here to gloat, and to be honest, that's fair. If that happens, go for it.
There's no way out of this one. You're done.
I've been a very outspoken opponent for this theory. If you stumbled upon this video and aren't actually invested in ReZero, well, to some, saying that Aldebaran and Subaru are not the same person, it's like hitting the rooftops in the most populated city of America and saying that the sky isn't blue on a clear summer day. In this video, I'm going to lay out every reason why I do not think Al is anybody but himself. I fully accept the possibility of being wrong, and I just hope that you go into this video with an open mind, because I know this take of mine is probably my least popular in the fandom. People have directed some very strong words at me for believing this, but I won't put them on blast in this video. I don't really know why they get so frustrated, but many accuse me of never extrapolating on why I do not believe in this theory. Obviously, this is not true. I made an entire Aldebaran video on what I believe his role in the story to be, but this video will be less theory and more an attempt at debunking. For those who want a sequel to that video, well, this isn't really going to be it, but that will be coming eventually. Sorry for the preamble. I just wanted to communicate the attitude of the community during this discourse, so that when you look back at this video maybe 5 or 10 years from now, maybe even when ReZero is over, you'll think that I'm either braver than a US Marine or I had truly lost it in 2024 and 2025. Well, what is Al equals Subaru? It's a theory that supposes through time loop shenanigans that Aldebaran is actually Subaru from a different timeline or from the future and he went back, something like that. And on its face, it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, Return by Death already introduces time-shifting powers. In fact, Al is often privy to information he shouldn't be, just like Subaru. He has the same height, hair color, and eye color as Subaru. I mean, isn't it obvious? This video is going to be full of spoilers for Arc 3, Arc 5, Arc 6, 7, 8, probably 9, as well as an innumerable amount of side stories. I highly recommend not watching this video if you aren't caught up, unless you're okay with being spoiled on a great number of things. Now, despite all these pieces of circumstantial evidence, Al equals Subaru, in my opinion, misses the forest for the trees. I think the answer isn't that Al equals Subaru, but rather, Al and Subaru serve similar roles in the ReZero world, not exactly being the same person. I talk about this more extensively in my first Aldebaran video, but to put it simply, ReZero has so much emphasis on fulfilling roles, theatrics, and treating itself like a stage play. Whether it be the prose itself, or characters like Cecile and Stride, or the role of the observers in totality, I believe people like Al, Flugel, and Subaru were isekai to fulfill a role, not that they are inherently one another. With new side story information, we have instances of characters like Felt playing the role of Farsail, as evidenced by Volcanica's reaction in the Melee side stories. And there's the elephant in the room of Anastasia or Otto being the Hoshin villain, and they're all clearly different people to the people that they're references to. The most common response I get to this talking point on Twitter is that Al and Subaru have way too many similarities, and to chalk them up to being symbolic similarities or metaphorical is bad writing. Well, I just flatly disagree, but I'm not really here to argue what you do or do not think a good writing is. We all have our own opinions on things, and if you think Al and Subaru being a parallel-driven dynamic is bad, that's up to you. Let's start by examining their similarities and seeing what we're working with when comparing Al and Subaru. What about their physical similarities? Well, focusing on where they are similar and ignoring the rest is a form of confirmation bias, because you're ignoring everything that they don't have in similarity, but let's take a full look at everything about them and see how similar they actually look. Let's start with their height. Natsuki Subaru is 5'8". Aldebaran is also 5'8". This is an undeniable similarity the two have. Next up, their hair color is the same. Well, maybe not exactly. Their hair in the text are both described as black, but when you look at the actual canon colorization done by the illustrator, there are minor similarities with how their hair is portrayed. When colored for Aldebaran, it takes on a more purplish gray compared to Subaru's, but of course, we could possibly chalk this up as just an artistic difference that doesn't mean anything for the text, so the next point would be their hairstyles. Natsuki Subaru has a very, very striking and iconic hairstyle, something you will not find on Aldebaran when we have seen his hair. This is what I mean by the aforementioned confirmation bias. Their hair color is described as the same, but when you look at their hair, the differences become clear immediately. Al does not have these little, bulbs or whatever, and instead Al has a very clear middle part. The argument could arise that perhaps it's just because Al's hair is longer, but we've canonically seen what Subaru's hair looks like when it's long thanks to Rem If, and it still maintains that notable feature. The only time Subaru's hair changes in the main story is when his memory is wiped in Arc 6 and his hair bulbs fall down. However, their form is still present, something Aldebaran does not have at all. Well, I guess that's 1-1 on the score chart, but so how about something big for Subaru's physical appearance? His eyes. Now, Subaru has something called Sanpaku eyes. It's a culturally loaded characteristic known as three whites, when you can see the sclera above or under the iris. This can easily be seen in all forms of Natsuki Subaru, and can also be seen on Aldebaran. What mainly differs, however, is everything else about their eyes. They are a completely different shape, minus the Sanpaku, and they don't even match with older Subarus from Agno If. Of course, one could again call into question the validity of the Atsuki illustration. If you look at a bunch of ReZero illustrations, you'll find that many characters have Sanpaku eyes, probably unintentionally. So I can understand being critical of this. However, this Atsuki illustration lines up with every instance we have of Al's face, minus one, which is Season 3, Episode 7. I shouldn't really entertain this screenshot because it's from the anime, and animes aren't usually a good source of arguments for the source material. Otherwise, Al and Subaru don't have the same eye color, and Capella doesn't have the looks of a royal, and Sirius can't be Fortuna because they have different voice actors, but I'll entertain it anyway. Season 3 gave us a look inside of Al's helmet, and the eyes are completely different to what we usually see. The character designer Sagawa just has a very particular style when it comes to drawing Season 3 faces. I like her designs, but they don't really match how they might look from the novels. Heiko has completely different eyes than the Ellen illustrations, and these shots can be drawn by multiple people at once, so I don't think they're really usable to point out how many characters may or may not look alike. So, do Al and Subaru look alike? Kinda, I guess? Sorta, but more importantly, they say the same things all the time, right? Okay, maybe not entirely. Al and Subaru sometimes use dialogue from one another, but this also isn't something unique to Al and Subaru. Subaru and Todd also say the same things, and they are notably not the same person, but instead antagonistic foils for one another, which sounds familiar. Todd and Rem also say the same thing as each other once, but I don't think anyone is out there arguing that they are the same character, because these similar lines of dialogue aren't meant to point you in the direction of someone being the same character as someone else. They're meant to create mental links between certain characters, and that's what they do. Subaru and Todd are deeply connected characters. Todd and Rem are connected due to the Todd, Katya, and Subaru-Rem dynamic, and the same logic can apply to Subaru and Aldebaran because they are very, very clear foils. Vincent and Chisha are not the same person just because Chisha can predict what Vincent is going to say and do, they're just in love. That doesn't mean that Chisha is a Vincent who went back in time. Vincent and Subaru look quite a bit alike, and that is a crucial plot point for Arcs 7 and 8, but they aren't the same person. I think looking alike and talking alike at this point in ReZero is kind of a nebulous concept. Infantilization actually tells us quite a bit about why Al cannot equal Subaru, and what it really comes down to is fundamentally different experiences and personalities. It's what gives us our first impressions of Al's actual physical characteristics, and shows just how different he can actually look at times, but more importantly, it reverts their brains to that of their child selves. This is repeated ad nauseum, with Subaru being reverted to a state where he feels like the Natsuki family member that has to live up to his father, hence the identity crises that inform Arcs 7 and 8. If we follow that, Al is completely different from Kid Subaru. Subaru tries to achieve everything, while also shrinking at Backlash and being an emotional little kid in Arc 7 Phase 4. He is frequently unable to hold back tears and dies at the slightest criticism from Vincent. On the flip side, Aldebaran as a child is extremely angry. He lashes out quickly at those around him, something that Subaru basically never does except against Vincent. He's prone to self-destruction and childish outbursts like kicking random walls and shit. They're both very emotional kids, but in two completely different ways. Subaru lacks any self-confidence and pushes himself to compensate, while Al takes out his anger and frustrations on those around him. There's also a small bit that might seem insignificant, but feels significant to me. They both comment on ninjas in Arc 7 as kids, and using their kid brains, they both think of things that were airing at the time of their childhood. For Subaru, he references Naruto. For Aldebaran, he references Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which could not be something Subaru would be extremely familiar with. Which would have kicked off in the 80s, which is more or less in line with Al's actual age of being 40, and in reference to TMNT, Subaru remarks that it was a famous show from yesteryear, implying he isn't super familiar with it. Who knows though, maybe Aldebaran is just a version of Subaru that found a working VCR in this isekai world and popped in some TMNT tapes. Outside of physical appearance, similar statements, and difference in childhood, there are three more in-universe things that we can analyze. The first is authorities, the second being stinky, and the third is this little shit right here. Let's start with this little shit. Cecilo's segment is seemingly completely capable of making out people's souls, even as a little shit. He was able to tell from a glance that Echidna wasn't actually Echidna, but was instead Sphinx, who he had killed earlier. This seems to be at direct odds with everything Cecilos does with Subaru and Al, and he spent time with both of them extensively. He perceived that they both have looping powers, but never once made a statement on the similarity of their souls, even post-soul awakening or whatever. You could argue maybe he just didn't find it necessary, and yeah, right, it's Cecilos. He would say anything he wants to. He would have no reason to hold that information close to his chest. A similar argument could be made for Priscilla, who could tell based on something that Yorna Mishigure was actually Sandra Benedict, who was actually Iris. But she never says a thing about Subaru and Al being the same person, and she is someone who has seen Al's face, though it's something Priscilla might withhold purely for comedy purposes, so that's why my leading argument there is Cecilos. Additionally, and thanks to Shadow, one of the lore masters of ReZero, for pointing this out, Clind is also a character capable of perceiving souls, something he apparently did in the Casanero If story, and with Arc 9, we have our first actual on-screen interaction between Clind and Aldebaran, and Clind has nothing to say about Al's soul. Of course, there is some room for error here, as maybe Clind just didn't look, but we could put a pin in this detail for now, as maybe it'll be relevant in the future. Second, them being stinky. This is canon, I fear. According to Garf in Arc 5, he followed what he thought was Subaru's scent and found Aldebaran. This is also canon and absolutely happened. There is no counter-argument against this. It's a big oddity, especially when you remember that Garfield cannot smell miasma, so it's not as if he could tell that Al had the same stink as Subaru. This is, however, another example of confirmation bias, as there are multiple instances of characters who love to smell people for some reason, not remarking that the two smell the same. Rem smelled Al in Arc 3 and said that he smelled suspicious, not that they smelled the exact same. Todd had Subaru's scent saved in his brain and never remarked about Al smelling like Subaru despite fighting each other. More nebulously, Mimi also never says anything about them despite being able to peg that Garf and his mom were related, though it's very possible that they just didn't spend enough time together for her to get that. What I'm trying to say is, yes, according to Garf, Subaru and Al smell the same, which is very sus and weird, and there's no really explanation for it. But with other characters not remarking something similar, it's possible that there is more than meets the eye to that. Finally, authorities. This really should be a smoking gun situation for how Al and Subaru can't be the same, but there's just one hole in it, which we can get to later. Anyone who has read ReZero and not relied on summaries or TikTok can tell you that their powers are fundamentally different. Aldebaran's requires conscious activation. It wraps the area in a translucent space, and also has a secondary aspect known as aggressor mode. Subaru's doesn't have anything like that. These are two fundamentally different powers, with just a similarity in that they cannot die, with a big asterisk on that. Just like Yorna or Roswell or any other character I can't think of right now that can't truly undergo soul wiping, because it turns out being able to die a lot keeps popping up. The main argument is about Loveless Return by Death, which is a fan term about how Subaru's authority worked in Arc 7, because Satella lost sight of him. It's an unbelievably common misconception that Subaru was actually using Aldebaran's authority because Return by Death broke, and Aldebaran said he had no authority. This is a red herring. It's something that the series loves to do. At no point does Subaru ever consciously activate Al's authority because he doesn't have it. He isn't using a domain previously set by Al because Al never went to the roof. And Arc 9 Chapter 14 also tells us that if Al goes too far from his territory, it crumbles. It also wouldn't explain why Subaru's authority keeps malfunctioning even after Al gets his back, because they are two different powers, but Subaru's was malfunctioning because Satella lost sight of him. This is very explicit in Arc 7 Phase 6. And it's possible Al's authority works the way it does because of the same reason, but the two powers, even at their worst, are still far too different. Arc 9 also reveals more fundamental differences with how their power works. First, Subaru's Return by Death works in a way that each death is processed by Ode Laguna to create a multitude of books, as evidenced by Arc 6. The common consensus was that Al's would have the same thing, however, he doesn't. Al has one Book of the Dead that updated live to account for the over 100,000 deaths against Reinhard, meaning it's very possible that Al's deaths are processed differently than Subaru's entirely, because they have a different power. This part is just speculation because Arc 9 is still going, but it's also notable that Al doesn't trigger the taboo when he shows Volcanica his book, while Al's entire plan hinged on activating Subaru's with Petra. It's possible Al doesn't have one, but it's also possible that it just doesn't trigger because Volcanica became him. And there's also a reference in Arc 8 to Al possibly having a taboo with Cecilia, so we can put a pin in this one for now as well, until more comes out. Do Al and Subaru have the same power? It's very clear no. Even at his worst, Subaru's power just became a Return by Death that lurched the checkpoint forward every few seconds. What power does Al have then? I really have no idea. Is it pride? I don't know. He seems like an apostle of envy more than a pride holder, but that's a whole different theory. So, do Subaru and Al have similarities? Of course, they have a bunch. But for every similarity they do have, there is something different about them that is conveniently ignored by Al equals Subaru theorizers. Again, I'm not saying that Al equals Subaru is totally impossible, and if after this video it gets confirmed, well, it is what it is. I just have a different interpretation of what these similarities mean, as I feel Al equals Subaru is boring, uninspired, and lazy. My interpretation plays into the theory I speak ad nauseum about on this channel when it comes to roles and the observers. As I've mentioned before in my old Aldebaran video, I think Al and Subaru are here for the same purpose, but with Arc 9 having shown us, there is a fundamental fracture between Natsuki Subaru and Aldebaran. In my opinion, the schism comes from Aldebaran believing or being pushed to believe that the only way to save Satella was to kill her and free her from her pain. And Natsuki Subaru thought that she could be saved and failed repeatedly, hence the invocation of Natsuki Subaru failed you from Echidna to Al, which could inform Al's disdain for Natsuki Subaru, shouldering heroic reveries and thinking that he could save her, and would also inform Aldebaran's anti-heroism mentality. I think boiling it down to they are both the same person hurts this really interesting dynamic in relationship. It hurts this concept of someone existing other than Subaru that judges him based off information he doesn't have, and hates Subaru for things he will never know about. And it's in stark contrast to how Subaru approached Todd in Arc 8 because all of his crimes were undone, and he took that into account for trying to be friendly with him. It makes the world feel much more narrow, as instead of this epic fantasy of isekai people being placed in their roles to fulfill a play, it's all just one guy. And everything being the result of just one guy hurts Al and Subaru's dynamic in Arc 3. Because Al was introduced at a point where Subaru had to face that he wasn't the most special being in the world. Al equals Subaru would effectively make it, well actually, Subaru is the most special man in the world because he is the one guy putting the pieces on the board. Now, I'm not deluded enough to think that Subaru isn't at least somewhat special. He's a Sage candidate and was cast in that role, and he was isekai in the first place, but there is a world of difference in being one of many isekai people to fulfill a role, and being the guy who is involved in every facet of the world. So, these are my arguments for Al doesn't equal Subaru. They only share surface-level physical similarities. They may or may not have the same scent. They have different childhood experiences and personalities. Their hair is drastically different when grown up. Even if this stupid if story tries really hard to push Al equals Subaru, they still don't even look the same. And all the people who can perceive souls said nothing about Al and Subaru being the same person. Also, gluttony? If Subaru's immune, why isn't Al? That's just a small detail that I've never been able to figure out. There is, however, one much more difficult to disprove theory that has emerged and is slowly gaining traction after Al equals Subaru, and that is Al equals Flugel, but not necessarily in the same way, rather. Echidna attempted to clone Flugel, and Aldebaran is the result. Is Al a Flugel soul clone? Shit, man, I don't know. I think there are certainly some inconsistencies with this idea. The most notable example to prove this theory is from No Stella No Life, in which Echidna says that despite being the same origin, she is impressed that Al is so different from him. I think a reading that Al is a different form of a Flugel soul clone is possible. It's not as bad for the story as Al equals Subaru, but to discard any other interpretation like a lot of people do on Twitter is yet again another form of confirmation bias. She marks an earlier or later birth, difference in environments, the scope of a sense of purpose as main contributors to their difference. You can take this literally. They are of the same origin, being Japan, but they are still different people. It could even be referring to Subaru, not Flugel. We know that Subaru was always in the equation now, and we can prove that with web novel Arc 4. Echidna says that Subaru arrives at the tea party earlier than expected, meaning this was plotted out with him in mind, allegedly. Subaru and Al were always in the equations, and it's possible this line of Echidna's is a reference to how different Subaru and Al turned out, which kind of feeds into my previous theory about Al wanting to kill Satella and Subaru wanting to save her. Now, if Aldebaran is a clone of Flugel, which is what this theory is supposing, that means the vessel known as Aldebaran would adjust to suit the soul. This is something that just happens over time with characters that inhabit others' bodies for long periods of time. This is one of the most iconic moments of Arc 8. It's something that Betelgeuse does, which is why he looks the same forever, as the bodies he hijacks end up taking his preferred form. If Al equals Flugel, well, Flugel doesn't look like Subaru beyond the surface level, so all the Subaru equals Flugel posting kinda becomes for naught. There's a description of Flugel's appearance in Arc 6 about how he was a different race and they don't really look alike to begin with. Of course, that could just be bullshit. We shouldn't accept at face value anything about Flugel's appearance being true, but it's something to at least keep in mind. The point is, Al and Subaru don't look exactly alike, which means either Al's body adjusted to Flugel's soul and Flugel looks nothing like Subaru, or Al's body hasn't adjusted at all, but why would that be when every other instance of bodyjacking we have ends up with the vessel taking form of the soul? The primary issue with the cloning theory is that cloning in ReZero is specifically stated to be exceptionally hard. Echidna couldn't even accomplish it consistently. That's the whole point of Arc 4. Nor could Roswell, who ends up just possessing his child instead of cloning himself. Cloning people is really hard, and Aldebaran will be a very notable exception to the cloning rules that we for some reason never learned about in Arc 4, or any side stories containing that group. Soul transcription is also described as exceedingly difficult, and if the gate is not highly similar to the souls, the soul transfer would bounce off of the gate, and even if it did succeed, the original soul's influence over the body would remain, and that is not a trait we ever see in Aldebaran. In fact, isekai people seems to be easier than soul transcription, given we have no downsides of bringing someone in from another world, and it's something Satella is seemingly able to do, though that's just speculation. Aldebaran's conquest to become himself doesn't have to necessarily be a reference to his genes or soul or becoming Flugel. There's a much simpler read that requires way less jumps in logic, that he now wants to fulfill the role of the following star, whatever that entails, after having given up on that. To become himself, to stand on the stage like he was maybe meant to, his original purpose, so he could become Aldebaran after having just been Al with Priscilla. I don't think Al equals Flugel soul clone damages the story as much as Al equals Subaru, but I'd much rather have Aldebaran be his own guy, from Japan, and in similar circumstances to Subaru. I think it's far more beneficial to his story, and it also feels weird to have Arc 8 be entirely about an antagonist being someone they aren't, just to copy-paste the same premise for Arc 9. And those are my reasons why I think Al is just Al. His similarities are exaggerated by the community, the story beats us over the head with role and theater theming, and it requires far fewer assumptions to say he is another isekai person rather than being a clone of someone's soul. I guess there's also another elephant in the room, which is specifically relating to the discussions about how Al is still technically his own person because he has formed a new life over these 20 or so years he's been around. I agree with this partially. ReZero very much believes that memories and experiences are what make you you, so yes, Aldebaran would be a different person when it comes to Subaru or Flugel at this point. I cannot and will not deny that. And I agree with the message ReZero is putting out there about people's experiences informing who they are. However, I think to say that because Al lived an extra 20 years or whatever outside of being the Natsuki Subaru we're familiar with means he has no relation to Subaru and is therefore a wholly different entity to be quite disingenuous. There would still be bits and pieces of him in there, as just because new experiences were planted on top of the old doesn't go away. It's not a straightforward situation like Rem and Rem or Ruby and Spica. It's much more like Natsuki Subaru and Natsuki Subaru. And while they clearly diverged from their Arc 1 selves, they still had a fundamental baseline that would inform at least somewhat of who these two individuals are. While writing this, Arc 9 Phase 2 is ongoing, and it's very possible I get egg on my face immediately after this video comes out, but if it get here before or even after this video's relevancy, I hope you understand my logic when it comes to the theories I believe, even if they are diametrically opposed to the general fandom. I have a lot more theories about Al's place in the ReZero world, but maybe that will come out when I make the second Al video, like my old theory video from the start of 2024. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe for more. You can also check the description down below to become a member, which gives you benefits like early videos, membership badges, and cool custom emotes. You can join the Discord where we talk about ReZero, Kagurabachi, Jujutsu Kaisen, and all kind of stuff. Additionally, you can go to the channel store and pick up some awesome stickers made by our channel artist, so you can carry the power of Graphia with you on your water bottle. That's about it though. Thank you for watching. See ya.